saw in the back, she invited me to do a talk, and she took it with great serenity when I gave her an idea that was a huge mouthful. The idea that we could learn something from manners that will help us write better IoT software and networks. And part of why I think we can do this is because they're confronting a very similar game. Both the middle-class Victorians in London at that time were trying to get the best connections to the best sort of people. And that's exactly the game that our IoT devices are playing today. And part of what got me thinking about this is since November of 2016, I've been talking about privacy and security issues for a newsletter that we put out every Tuesday for Crashbase. The Tuesday sweep, it's a reminder to back up and update your things with some news items. And honestly, I feel like every week I'm like, bad users, don't use this service, don't buy this device, like password manager. It's all very finger waggy, and I am not enjoying it at all because I am not a Luddite. I went to grad school. I've been putting things on the internet since the late 90s. I love putting things on the net. I know, right? And I worked for 2 years and studied under and then worked for 2 years with Tom Igoe, who this is his third edition for Making Things Talk. He was writing the first edition when I worked for him. And this was at the NYU's Interactive Telecommunications Program, and so I really, in 2018, want to move on from chastising end users to talking about how we can recruit better participation in thinking about how to make these services better. And not just the technical members of those teams, because the technical members, like a lot of the people in this room, they know. Like, y'all know there are security problems. You know how to fix the security problems already. And what's happening is that the security and privacy problems are not technical. We have products that are rushed to market. They are underfunded. They are business models that are entirely based on the idea that there should be no privacy for the end users. There are bad government policies that are making sure there are no consequences for those bad decisions. And then you have low diversity on teams that are developing these products that can't therefore come up with the right threat model because it doesn't even occur to them that these things could go wrong, or their user base that they're testing on isn't good enough. And if they're even doing user testing at all, which they clearly weren't in Hawaii, and even then, even if they've tested the user interface, they end up being part of a bad process scenario where your staff would rather use Dropbox than your company VPN because the company VPN is like terrible. And then always people are just going to be people. So we come up with all these technical conversations around privacy and security, but we really have to recruit these non-technical people who are making really terrible decisions really early on. And a lot of what we're failing to realize is that for better or for worse, we're not robots building a robot society, although that might be kind of relaxing. We're cyborgs building a cyborg society. And so we need cyborg processes for developing our products. And design and development processes will always have a better result when fields like anthropology and engineering share their knowledge base to go forward. The costs are real for getting this wrong. I just read today that Rand put out a conservative estimate, 1.1% of the GDP as the low estimate for the consequences of bad internet security. Yeah, and the high estimate was like around 32.4%, which is like, how does it even happen? So hundreds of billions to trillions of dollars of consequences, economic consequences for not getting this right. But I think one of the best embodiments that a lot of people are familiar with to talk about a cyborg society is really, yes, a robot. This is C-3PO. He's a science fiction character, for those of you who don't know, in a movie called Star Wars. And his specialty is protocol. He's a protocol droid, and he can speak the binary language of moisture evaporators and kind of like any language that any meat sack throws at him. You see this, it's like 2 movies later when he's in Jabba the Hutt's court, and any language anyone speaks, he can speak that too. But Uncle Owen gets it immediately. The first time he meets C-3PO, is like, I bet etiquette's your thing. And that's exactly right. The word protocol comes from the world of etiquette. Who enters the room first, who talks first, what do they say, what's the correct response. All of this gets decided way in advance in settings like a royal court, but we even in our State Department, what am I doing wrong with the mic? Raise it up. Lost karaoke night. All right. So even our State Department, although we're not super into royal stuff here in the United States, our State Department has an Office of Protocol, and it's not what most people in this room think of when we hear the word protocol, which is network protocol. So FTP, HTTP, hypertext transfer protocol, file transfer protocol, dynamic host configuration protocol, point-to-point protocol, all of these Ps, everything in there that has a P at the end, that P is protocol. Even the things that don't have the letter P at the end are referred to as protocols. And what's neat is these protocols, everything from like, what is an email? Like, how do you tell that something that you're getting is an email, to what is a 1 and what is a 0? So down to that physics to information layer. Those are referred to as protocols as well. And so this parallel between network connections of computers and networked communication connections between people is not new. Like, I didn't make this connection. The very first people who were writing network protocols saw this rigid system where there was an order that everything was going to be done that was predictable, and they thought, this is great, we'll use that word. And what they were really saying when they did that is that people and packets are going to be playing the same game. And this is a game tree. This is from game theory. We're gonna sort of hide a lot of the game theory in this talk. But protocols are setting up conditions, and the players are optimizing these conditions for their own utility. And we aren't talking about generic, any old group of humans and any old network right now. We're going to be talking about, this is what I promised, the Victorians in London, the middle class Victorians specifically in London, versus the IoT devices. And this is a, now you go even faster. And so the Victorians who were walking down a street in London would have been creating a bunch of algorithms in their head about how to make it down that street. The same way a group of cars driving down the street are creating an ad hoc mesh network. It's kind of the same level of math with the same goal to get that best connection to the best sort of connectors, nodes. And the worst case is dire. The worst case is dire for both sets of entities. Either complete removal from the network, social ostracism, that was death. Like, we're social creatures. Removal from the network is death from us, and removal from the network is death for IoT devices. You can't have an IoT device without the eye. But it's not just that the game sounds the same, because you could make that game sound the same. People have been terrified of social isolation forever, and what we'll see is that there are actually a lot of connections between the demographics of what was happening for the middle-class Victorians and IoT devices now. On the left, we have the population of London through the 19th century. Queen Victoria took over as queen on June 20th. 1837, and the population of London is just soaring, going up. And now we have these IoT devices where the population of their presence on the network is just soaring up, going up. And this is what Gartner's. You can see they have a very rosy projection for 2020. This is actually a little bit revised down than what it was. This was Gartner's estimate. At one point in 2010, someone was saying they thought there were going to be 50 billion. So people are a little overhyped about IoT, but it's still we're going up pretty fast. We've more than doubled. And what happens when you get, and these numbers do not reflect tablets or iPhones. This is just IoT devices. And what happens when you have big population surges in places that were not built for that many entities is you get disease and you get crime. So on the left here, you have a cartoon that someone made that was meant to be a drop of water in London. It's actually a political satire. But you were gonna die, basically. Chances are good that you would die young and die painfully in 19th century cities. And cholera, typhoid, all of these things. In 1858, there was something called the Great Stink, which the Thames River smelled so bad that they had to shut down Parliament. This is eventually what got Victorian London their sewer systems. And meanwhile, just now at the beginning, so the Victorian England was marked by an increase over the Victorian era in their health and sanitation, but we're now just at the beginning of our IoT, and we've got all these little botnets crawling around, taking over things. There's a great article in The Atlantic last year where someone put their honeypot toaster on the internet, and within an hour, it had already been found, and people were knocking at its door, being like, "Can I take you over? Hey, how about you? Can I take you over?" And that's because Internet of Things devices are global citizens. Anyone from anywhere in the world can come knocking at their door. In the same way in Victorian England, London was the center of an empire. And you could get anything from anywhere. So your IoT device can tell you whether or not it's raining in Mumbai, but a middle-class Victorian probably would have been wearing cotton that they had brought from there. So I'm kind of like harping on the middle class. So what do I mean by middle class Victorians? Because the middle class Victorians did not mean the same thing then that it does now, particularly not in England. Middle class Victorian England was kind of a caste system, and when you wouldn't say middle class, you would say the middle classes, because it was a broad range of people. A junior clerk in a firm would earn like £100 a year, but the chairman of that board in that bank would be earning £1,000 a year. But they were both middle class, quote unquote, because what they were was they were stuck between working class folks. So a middle class housewife would have at least one servant, at least some days, and the servant would be in the working class. But the upper classes was bumping up against the gentry in the peerage, and in fact frequently would have more money than some members of that class. But the fact of the matter was is that they had a job. So if you were making your money from a job as opposed to land, you were middle class. If you were, and this, with the rise of the Industrial Revolution, there were a lot more people who could do that, could make a decent living at a job, and they had leisure time. They could go on picnics, which is why I picked this picture. Like the invention of leisure time was like a huge new thing. But then this middle class didn't exist before then, and so it was fascinating. The same way, not even like 3 years ago, did the Raspberry Pi Zero W exist. And what we're looking for there in the middle is a computing device that had more computing power than Voyager did, and it's like $10. It's got a radio on it and everything, and that's retail. $10 retail. So what's happened for me as someone who's been doing this a long time is that things that would have been a thesis project back when I was in grad school, you can knock out in an afternoon. And so that's pretty amazing. And this is very, very new. And they're both stuck with really terrible, terrible models. That are a bad fit. So on the left, we have the gentry. We have the peerage, actually. We have the royal family tree. And the whole peerage and gentry were not playing the same game that the middle-class Victorians were. The middle-class Victorians, desperate to not be lower classes, were looking up at the Victorians and trying to ape their behavior, but they weren't understanding that the game was different. The game for the middle-class Victorians was to make as many connections as possible with the best quality people. these were the best quality people. They didn't need to connect to you. What they wanted was land. They were all about aggregating land. So all the rules that they were following were about aggregating land into a small number of families. So that model fails by the end of the Victorian era. So that's good to know. And then now, this is ARPANET, a bunch of computers that it was hard to get on this network. And so you could have a lot of default trust in this system because it was going to be hard to get on it in the first place. So in both contexts, you have small networks with defined people that you could look up in a book. There is like a book for both of them that you can look up. So what? So you should always ask, so what? So this isn't just like, this is kind of like fun, this is great, but if we can't use it to improve how we're working and how we're doing things, then it's sort of just like entertainment, and that's not good enough. So what we can do is we can look at the resources that the Victorians left us. They made book after book after book after book about manners. Publishers would just like pop out a new one to make money because they were guaranteed to sell. And these books are strategies on how to optimize your utility from your network. That's exactly what they are. And one thing to keep in mind, though, when we look at these, is that what you print a lot of books about is not necessarily what you do well. So your image, our image, if we get our image from the actual people who were the Victorians, like how are they really behaving from these books, and assuming that everyone was following those manners will be wrong. Because the same way they weren't following all those books, we don't have a ton of books about decluttering in the early 21st century because we're great all living in modernist houses with nothing. So the fact that there were all these books about manners were telling us actually what the Victorians were really bad at and really afraid of. They loved, for example, conspicuous consumption. They were constantly told not to do that, but they loved it. They put color on everything with these new inks. They loved to gossip. They invented flirting. They invented it. That was not a word that was used. But what was also really interesting is with the loss of the village networks that they had, they were now in these new weird public spaces where you would have both friends and strangers in the same place. And they didn't know how to do that because that's not something that happened before. And so they write lots of rules of how to behave in the ballroom. And if you got it wrong, you would be satirized. They love satire and scandal. Again, these are things that they were told not to do in these books, but you don't make rules if no one's doing it. And then there are these like, nobody liked table manners. Nobody liked them. They were just like everywhere, every season, some new cup that you had to learn how to use. It was very stressful. So looking at these manners and these strategies for how to like optimize your network, we can't have our IoT devices learn which fork to use. That's not important to them. What we do instead is we look at the principles that underlie all of these rules. Now, going through this slide point by point with examples would take me a very, very long time. So I'm going to focus on two, the first and the last. And the worldview of the Victorians, man, the world is chaos. It is dirty. It is full of disease. You are going to die. There are cut purses. There are cut throats. Your life is nothing like your parents. They can't help you. It's all super confusing. And you are the only hope. You can be the order to the universe. Just you. You can be this gentle breeze of oasis of calm and this chaos for all the people around you. And your reputation as this gentle pool of serenity will be the only thing you have. Because you don't have land or a title to back up your reputation or your social standing. You only have your reputation of being calm and cool and collected at any time. And any crack in that veneer, so information is power. And I quote actually Sir Arthur Conan Doyle as, in the voice of Sherlock, I've had to do with 50 murders in my career, but the worst of them never gave me the repulsion for which I have for this fellow. And the fellow that he's talking about in that context is a blackmailer. So better dead than having your reputation ruined. And so if you're going to build a threat model for a Victorian, it's all about the blackmailers. They're terrifying. And they really would if you didn't comply with the behavior of your network. That network would cut you out. It was, forget being ghosted by a person. You were ghosted by a society. There's this amazing story about this woman who married a buffer station, and then she showed up at this party, and all the women in the party just turned their parasols, open parasols to her, and just like no one spoke to her the entire party. Oof. I mean, this is brutal. And so you look at some of these principles on that slide before, and you get to see that there are commonalities with sort of known security by design principles. Don't trust anyone except for by steps, principle of least privilege. But the problem with this particular set of vocabulary to talk about these problems is it's very technical and it's also militarized. And when you deal with non-technical stakeholders, they're not necessarily going to be attracted to that type of language. But even when you are someone who's really comfortable in this world and comfortable with this language, it isn't necessarily a language that opens up creativity and makes you think about new solutions in new ways. And the mechanisms that the Victorians used, the middle-class Victorians used to support their principles were amazing. There are these beautiful codes. It's all codes. What you wore, how you bow, what stationery you used, what dance did you dance with who, what flowers were in the bouquet, and you would have to keep records of it. This is a woman's journal, and she just like kept record of everything, what shoes she wore, who she saw, what flowers she bought. It was just amazing, down to the very architecture they built. So this is a fairly aspirational home. This would have been an upper middle class home, and it was definitely marketed as being good enough for the gentry, which is actually a way that you know it was actually really for the upper middle class. And immediately just sort of, so many rooms. And they're all for a very special purpose. They all have a time of day that they would have been used and a sets of people who would expected to have been in them or not in them. And the ones that are about work are pushed to the bottom and up to the top and to the back. So you never let them see you sweat. Everything gets pushed in and out of the way. And there are varying onion layers of intimacy. So you have a foyer, an entrance hall here that some people would never even get past. If you were lucky, you would be invited to the library or then maybe up to a drawing room. If you were a member of the household, you would move up to the bedrooms. And what's interesting, and this is in the builder's description of this house, so I think a lot of people are aware that sort of men were external-facing processes and women were considered internal-facing processes in this, in this world. I'll keep going. And so there's a bathroom on the first floor of bedrooms, and that was the bathroom for men. And there's a bathroom on the next floor of bedrooms, and that's the bathroom for women. So the very people who brought bathrooms into houses were so worried about levels of intimacy that they even shoved the women even further away from the door when they went to the bathroom, so they would never be caught with their drawers down. Let's see, let's wiggle this cable, see if that gives us anything. Cable, hello. Let's try it. And then. Did that do it? Fingers crossed. Oh yeah, this will be.
Yeah, exactly. I'll go get my machinist smell it. Nope.
Hiya.
5 people up here will know we've got people.
Exactly.
Hiya. Okay, well, you work on this. I can still talk about architecture without the architecture behind me for a little bit, because I remember what else is going on with these. So there's increasing levels of intimacy, but the other thing that you'll notice when this slide comes back is that the stairway is generally in Victorian houses visible from the front door. So they have lots of little rooms, but they're always creating these vignettes where there's something special out of your reach. You're never going to be allowed to see it, but it's there. So it's fascinating, this whole like layers of intimacy, but then also being a little bit of a show off to let people know that there is like something going on. It's lots of fun. Oh. And so the slide after this, I know, so visible and out of reach. Yeah, so the marketing shtick for this building is pretty fabulous. But what you'll see then also is in the smaller buildings, smaller houses, the wee little cottages. Okay, you know what I'm going to try to do? Oh, well, there goes sleepy computer. I'm going to try to turn off mirroring, maybe. Hold on, let me do it.
It should be okay.
It's definitely the connection. Because it keeps turning off the computer too, so. Oh, great. Nope. It's all good. So in the smaller buildings, in the smaller houses, it's exactly the same. It's just miniaturized. So instead of multiple rooms on the bottom floor, you'll have like just a library and a drawing room, and then you go straight into bedrooms, and there won't be servants' quarters on top. It'll just be the family, because they wouldn't necessarily have had, here we go. You wouldn't have had a live-in maid, they maybe would have had a housekeeper, but they might have also just for a day. So it's the same stuff, but it's like smaller. What you're never gonna see in a Victorian house is an open floor plan. Never gonna happen, because their architecture reflected their values. Architecture reflects values. So this is another one of those protocol versus protocol. We use the word architecture also to describe networks, and I'm totally stealing that. But it's really who talks to who can see what information at what time. You really are making decisions about payoffs that are going to have positive and negative impact on your participants. And let's see, this next slide, I need it. Because I spent a long time on this next slide. And the whole presentation dies on this slide, I don't care. But there's one next slide. I know. Okay, we can hold that. Wait, he's coming. I know, Vanna. Oops. One last slide. So sad. I know. No, this one I know. This one I need, though. So this next slide. Aha! Yes. This took a long time. So I think, so how am I going to show these people this is fun and it's going to have a payoff? And so for me, that means charts or spreadsheets, which isn't fun for everyone else, but there are colors. And so this is my sort of what would a network architecture for a home Internet of Things be for a Victorian family? And this is still a little aspirational. Instead of so it's the first set of plans, rather than the second set of house plans, and you start coming into the house with the modem, and immediately there's a foyer. So there's a courtesy wireless router maybe for things coming in. But what there also is there's something I've referred to as a file foyer. So there may have been a terminal where if you wanted to download files and check them out first, or install a program and see if it's credible first. You would do it on your file foyer, and it would be wiped out every night by a backup image. And then you would have pushed to the side, the kitchen and domestics, all the service applications. So your appliances, your HVAC, your outdoor lighting, sort of any exterior windows and door locks would be wired down. You would have, in every room would have its own router which might actually also include multiple radios. We'll talk about that in a second, where you'd have door locks and window curtains and things like that. Seen it. It's there. And above all the green that was down here a second ago was the purple, which is like your entertainment network. So if you're going to like watch a movie, you would do it on the entertainment network. And moving, God, I know this one so well. So you would keep that separately. And then you would have your children would be on a separate, maybe virtual private server. Haha, Eddie's got it. Show it up for the group. I know it. It's like in my retinas now. I've started it so many times. So your children would have their own virtual private server. Maybe they would be allowed to connect to governess.org, and that's it. And then you move on to stuff. If you were going to do work in your home, if you were ever going to do work in your home, that would be weird because they really separated their work life and home life quite a bit. But you would have that on its own separate network as well. But what you didn't see in that image were a little fluffy clouds. You didn't see a single little fluffy clouds. What you saw were mainframes. That house had 3 mainframes in it because they were not letting anything out of that building. They were terrified of blackmail. They were not going to do it. It all was in the house. I mean, if these people kept carriages and servants, they could get a mainframe. And so that's what they had them. They had all their computing power they needed in their house. No heating bills, just mainframes. And so you get this interesting thing where you can start to talk about wow, if I was going to do this. Now, not all of this is going to be a good choice for us, but it is a fun exercise to sort of break yourself out of, here we go. Fun exercise to break yourself out of the box when you're thinking about how these things could be possibly done. And so let's talk a little bit about these little routers, because that was the picture that they had on Lucidchart. These routers, I just put them in there, would be in rooms. So all these little boxes, let's try it. Yes, okay. All these little rooms, so anytime there's a little box, that means there's a room, and that room is completely coated in EMF shielding. And that EMF shielding on the upper floors would be beautiful. It would be wonderful Victorian wallpaper. They would really show off the fact that, yes, we're blocking you, and it's great, and we're cozy in here. And intimate, now that you've been allowed up onto the next floor, then it would be blocking multiple channels, because these routers would maybe possibly even have multiple different radios, because these different colors, it would, what the green router and the purple router could be in the same box as long as there were 2 Ethernet jacks behind them, because these two are not talking to each other. They are completely separated. And so different devices, though, might end up on different bands. So the green stuff might all be 2.4 gigahertz, and the purple stuff might all be 5 gigahertz, et cetera. This would be a possibility. And you would have to go through this ritual of introducing a new device to the room. This, on the right, is they would... They were such hypocrites. It was beautiful. Don't show off, but then if anyone visits you, leave their calling card in a dish where everyone can see it. It's show off, but don't get caught doing it. It's hilarious. It's just glorious. And so this is an example of one of those calling card trays that you would leave your calling card on if you were just stopping by to say hello. And so the routers might be really pretty, but they might not be these boxes that you hide behind the bookshelf. You might put them out. And so if you're a new RGB light bulb showing up into a room, which they would love. They would have loved those. I mean, just the colors alone. You would go and you would show it to the little serving dish, maybe leave it, and it would get its thing. Very much like if anyone has AirPods, it might work like that. Apple does have the patent. But I do want to say this is really fun, but again, I started to talk about this a second ago. This is not to say Victorians are fun, but they are not perfect. And so you have to be careful. They were developing a set of strategies that worked for their situation. And in 1901, Queen Victoria died, and then 10 years later, boom, totally different. Women were wearing different things. Everything was different. The middle class, finally the middle class men could vote. Middle class women couldn't vote yet, but like they had more power. They started to make their own decisions about what it meant to have a powerful middle class society. I'm so sorry. How am I doing on time? Okay. Yeah, we got stuck. So we think on one level, like, ooh, they got rid of it all. We're stuck. We are stuck with some really bad memes from the Victorian era, like really expensive white wedding dresses that you can never wear again. And the fact that men are allowed to have like the clothes are terribly boring. That was the Victorians. And then this whole like Victorian scientists had these ideas about gender norms, and they went looking for it in nature and just like completely ignored evidence that said that women are not always faithful and men are not always promiscuous. That's a 2015 article in the Smithsonian magazine. And then just recently they talked about, this is part of what I called at the bathroom thing earlier, this idea that you couldn't possibly have people of the same genders using the same commode. Scandal. That's the Victorians. A lot of these things that we think of as like having always been true were in fact invented by the middle class Victorians. So we have to be really careful. We have to be really careful about what values we are installing in our architectures because they're not going to be forgotten. This is it's really hard to tell. This is the Roomba project. This is something that I built. It's a Nirvana-seeking robot. It's built on a Roomba, and I replaced the vacuum with a color sensor, so it's just like searching the floor for Nirvana. Because I was like, what are these vacuums going to do when there's like the next vacuum that's better than they are? Is it going to be sad? So what are they going to... how are they going to find their purpose in life? So I did this, and this was 2006. So I've been anthropomorphizing things for a long time. And so again, it's really useful. It's incredibly important that we bake the values that we want into the systems, and part of how we do that is making sure there's a dialogue between disciplines, between anthropology and engineering, so we can find these patterns that are common and do something with them to make life better for everyone and everything, AI user group, that comes after us.